For the past 15 years, Mark Anderson had built his life around the stability and routine of his job at Tech Solutions, Inc. It was more than just a paycheck for him. It was a sense of security, a place where he felt valued and recognized for his expertise. From the time he had started as a junior developer to his current position as a senior project manager, Mark had steadily climbed the ladder within the company. He was dependable, trustworthy, and to his colleagues, a quiet leader who always seemed to have the right solution to any problem. In many ways, Tech Solutions, Inc. was his second home. Each morning, Mark drove to the office, passing through familiar streets, past the coffee shop, where he grabbed his first cup of the day, and then into the parking garage where he had parked his car for years. It was a routine he had grown comfortable with. Inside the office, he knew everyone, from the newest interns to the executives in the corner offices. His work had become part of his identity. He was the guy people turned to for advice, for guidance, or simply to get things done. There was a sense of pride in that, knowing that his experience and reliability were seen as valuable assets by both his peers and his superiors. Mark's days were busy, but predictable. His mornings were filled with meetings to discuss project timelines and client needs, followed by afternoons where he focused on problem solving and overseeing his team. He was an expert at balancing multiple tasks, ensuring that deadlines were met and that his team was supported. His office was a hub of activity where ideas were exchanged and plans were set into motion. His role as a senior project manager had come with its fair share of responsibility, but Mark had always handled it carefully, managing both the technical side of the projects and the interpersonal dynamics within his team. The routine of his career had become comforting. Mark didn't mind the long hours, he was used to them. He had always believed that hard work was the key to success, and his track record had shown that every project he had worked on had been completed successfully, earning him recognition from his superiors. As far as he could tell, everything was going according to plan. He was respected within his team, admired for his technical skills, and trusted by his superiors to get the job done right. The prospect of a promotion seemed imminent. Mark had always been loyal to Tech Solutions, Inc., and in return, the company had given him opportunities to grow slowly but steadily. Yet, as the years passed, something began to stir within him, a quiet dissatisfaction that he could no longer ignore. At first it was subtle, like a passing thought that he would quickly dismiss, but eventually it became a feeling that crept into his mind more often than he would have liked. Mark realized that despite his success and the stability of his job, he had begun to feel a sense of stagnation. The thrill of starting a new project or solving a complicated technical issue had started to fade. The routine that once brought him comfort was now beginning to feel confining. The thought of another 15 years in the same role, doing the same things in the same way, didn't excite him the way it once had. But it wasn't just the work itself that left him feeling unfulfilled. It was the realization that his career had become predictable. Mark had always been a dedicated employee, working hard and giving his best to the company. But as he spent more time reflecting on his future, he started to ask himself whether he was truly achieving everything he wanted. Was this all there was? Was this really the pinnacle of his career? Or had he simply found comfort in the security it offered? Despite these thoughts, Mark found himself trapped in the safety of the comfort zone he had built. His job at Tech Solutions, Inc. provided financial security for him and his family. His career was stable, and the potential for further growth was always within reach. But deep down, he knew that he wasn't tapping into his full potential. He had always been a hard worker, but now he started to wonder if there was something more he could be doing, something beyond the confines of his current role, something that aligned more with his passions and aspirations. Yet the fear of leaving that security, of venturing into the unknown, held him back. One day during a lunch break, Mark bumped into an old friend from college, Tom, who had left the corporate world years ago to start his own business. Tom seemed content, his eyes bright with the kind of excitement that Mark hadn't seen in a long time. Over lunch, they talked about the challenges and rewards of entrepreneurship, and Tom's enthusiasm was contagious. Mark found himself intrigued, yet hesitant. Tom asked him a simple question that stayed with Mark long after their lunch ended. If money and stability weren't a concern, what would you be doing right now? That question gnawed at Mark for weeks. He realized that deep down, he had always dreamed of something more. Something that combined his technical skills with his creativity. Something where he could build, innovate, and grow. Mark had a passion for digital marketing and branding, an interest he had nurtured quietly over the years, helping friends and small businesses with their marketing strategies. But it was just a side project, a hobby, a what-if that he had tucked away in the back of his mind. The more he thought about it, the more Mark realized that his side hustle could be more than just a hobby. The idea of launching his own business, of transitioning from corporate life to entrepreneurship, became increasingly appealing. Yet the uncertainty of leaving behind a steady job for something untested weighed heavily on him. Could he really take the leap? Was he prepared to risk it all for something that had no guaranteed success? As Mark continued to wrestle with these questions, he started to recognize that the comfort he had built over the years at Tech Solutions Inc. was now more of a barrier than a blessing. His secure job, his stable salary, and the predictability of his routine had all made him comfortable. But had they also made him complacent? Was he ready to take the risk to step out of the comfort zone and into a new future? In the weeks that followed, Mark began making small changes. He devoted more time to his side hustle, treating it less like a hobby and more like a legitimate venture. He reached out to clients for feedback, expanded his services, and invested in courses to sharpen his marketing skills. The spark he had once felt in his work at Tech Solutions Inc. started to reignite in his side business. The more he worked on it, the more he realized that his future wasn't in the corporate grind. It was in creating something of his own. As the days and weeks passed after his conversation with Tom, Mark found himself growing more and more disillusioned with the company he had once viewed as a career cornerstone. The subtle signs were all there if he cared to look. It started small, just a shift in the mood of the office. Meetings that used to be collaborative and inclusive felt more rushed. Discussions that once focused on innovative solutions and growth now centered around cost-cutting measures and streamlining processes. Mark noticed that the conversations with senior management were becoming less about development and more about budgets, metrics, and quarterly targets. There was a growing sense that the company was shifting away from the values he had respected when he first joined. It wasn't just the focus on profit margins that unsettled Mark. It was the growing tension within the leadership team. In the past, Tech Solutions Inc. had been led by a team of experienced, thoughtful leaders who valued stability. But as new executives began to filter in, some from larger corporations with a much more aggressive approach to business, the atmosphere began to change. The newcomers were focused on scaling the company, adopting a mentality that emphasized rapid growth and expansion. At all costs, innovation was being driven by market competition, not by a genuine desire to create meaningful long-term solutions for clients. Mark started to feel like he was being squeezed from all sides. He was still responsible for his projects, but the environment around him was becoming increasingly corporate, leaving little room for the type of creative problem-solving that had originally drawn him to the company. The long-standing relationships that Mark had cultivated with colleagues started to feel more transactional than genuine. He couldn't help but wonder if he was just another cog in the machine being pushed forward because of his expertise, but not really valued for who he was. One particularly telling moment came during a quarterly town hall. Meeting Mark had always looked forward to these meetings. Years ago, they were an opportunity for the leadership to share the company's successes, discuss new ideas, and listen to feedback from employees. This time, however, things felt different. The new CEO, Roger Simmons, a recent hire who had been brought in to shake things up, delivered a presentation that was filled with corporate jargon. He spoke of disrupting the market and seizing new opportunities, all while downplaying the importance of the team that had been working at Tech Solutions Inc. for years. It was as if the hard work of the long-standing employees didn't matter anymore. The focus was entirely on change and growth, with no acknowledgement of the work that had gotten the company to where it was. At one point during a Q&A session, a colleague of Mark's asked Roger about the future of the company's research and development R&D team, which had always been a core part of their innovation and process. Roger's response was cold. "We're moving away from R&D," he said. "The future is in scalable solutions, not just in technical advancements. We need to cut down on unnecessary spending and focus on efficiency." Mark's heart sank as he listened. He had always been a believer in the importance of research, of constantly pushing the boundaries of what the company could offer. The decision to downplay R&D in favor of short-term efficiency felt like a sign of things to come. This wasn't the company he had dedicated his life to. This wasn't the company that had nurtured creativity and long-term growth. As the weeks passed, Mark noticed more changes. The company's core values, those that had once been a point of pride, seemed to be eroding with each passing day. The new management, particularly Roger, was pushing the company to focus on short-term financial goals, often at the expense of the employees who had been there from the start. Mark was no longer part of the strategic conversations. Decisions were being made without his input, and his expertise was increasingly being ignored. It was a slow, insidious feeling, like being gradually squeezed out of a space he had once owned. The final straw came during a meeting about an upcoming project. With a key client, Mark had spent months working on the proposal, ensuring that every detail was aligned with the client's needs and expectations. But when it was time for the final pitch, Roger dismissed Mark's work, opting instead for a simplified, cost-effective proposal that cut corners and ignored several key aspects of the original plan. The client was less than thrilled, and Mark could see the disappointment in their eyes. After the meeting, Mark confronted Roger in his office. "Why did we abandon the strategy we had been working on? That proposal had real value for the client." Mark said, his frustration boiling over. Roger's response was curt. "We're not in the business of making things complicated, Mark. It's time to simplify and get results." It was at that moment that Mark realized the company he had given so much to had fundamentally changed. The priorities had shifted, and the values he had once admired were being replaced by a cold, efficiency-driven mentality. The leadership that had once valued his contributions was now dismissing him as an afterthought. It was no longer about innovation or doing things right. It was about quick wins and cutting costs, no matter the long-term consequences. Mark had always prided himself on his ability to adapt to change, but this felt different. This wasn't the kind of change that would help the company grow. It was the kind that would slowly dismantle everything that had made Tech Solutions Inc. successful. And as much as he tried to convince himself that the company's shift was just a phase, the signs were becoming too obvious to ignore. His days at Tech Solutions Inc. were numbered, and he knew it. Despite the growing frustration and disappointment, Mark couldn't let go of the idea of something more. The side hustle he had started months earlier, the digital marketing consultancy, had been growing slowly but steadily. What had begun as a small project had now turned into a viable business with paying clients. As he worked on his side hustle during the evenings, he began to realize that this was what he was passionate about. This was the future he had been waiting for. The opportunity to be his own boss, to create something of his own, and to build a business on his own terms. As he sat in his office late one night, staring at his computer screen and reviewing the latest contract for his side hustle, Mark made a decision. The time had come to stop waiting for change at Tech Solutions Inc. He would take control of his future, whether that meant growing his side hustle into a full-time business or pursuing another opportunity. The warning signs had been there for months, and he was finally ready to act on them. Mark had been at Tech Solutions Inc. for 15 years. 15 years of late nights, early mornings, and countless projects. Some successful, others not so much, but always a learning experience. He had poured his energy into the company, building something he thought was unshakable. The idea that he could lose it all was something he never even considered, but that's exactly what happened. It started with a routine meeting, a weekly check-in with his manager, Roger Simmons, and the executive team. Mark walked into the conference room with his usual confidence, ready to discuss the progress of his current projects and offer his insights on upcoming initiatives. He had no reason to suspect that this would be anything other than another typical meeting. After all, he had been the go-to person for nearly every project that came through the door. His work ethic was impeccable, and his results spoke for themselves. But when he sat down and looked around the room, he sensed something was different. The energy in the room was tense, and there was a noticeable chill in the air. Roger and the others exchanged uneasy glances before Roger finally spoke. "Mark, I'm afraid we have some difficult news," Roger began, his voice steady but distant. "After a company-wide review and some internal restructuring, we've had to make some tough decisions. Unfortunately, your position has been eliminated." Mark's heart stopped. For a moment, it felt like the entire room had gone silent. The words didn't make sense. His mind struggled to process what he was hearing. He had been with the company for more than a decade, through ups and downs. He had been part of major projects, had seen the company grow from a small team to a thriving tech firm. How could this be happening? "I don't understand." Mark said, the words coming out quieter than he intended. "I've been here for 15 years, and I've given everything to this company. Why now?" Roger's face softened, but there was no real emotion in his eyes. "It's part of the company's new strategy, Mark. They're consolidating some departments, and unfortunately, your role doesn't fit into the new structure. This isn't a reflection of your performance, but rather a decision made at the top level. I know this is difficult, but we'll offer you a severance package and help with job placement services. The room felt like it was closing in on Mark. He could hear Roger's words, but they felt muffled, like he was underwater. This couldn't be happening. After all the years he had invested, after all the projects he had led, after every early morning and late night spent working to ensure the company's success, he was being let go. There had been no warning, no heads up, no indication that his position was at risk. Mark's mind raced as he tried to process the shock. He was too stunned to even think about the severance package or what the next steps would be. He had dedicated so much of his life to Tech Solutions Inc., believing in the company's mission and its future. To be told that his role was no longer needed, that his career at the company was over, felt like a betrayal. It was a cold reality that hit him harder than any failure or mistake ever could. He wanted to argue to plead his case. He wanted to ask why he hadn't been given any warning, why he hadn't been allowed the chance to adapt or make changes to his role. He had been a trusted senior project manager, a steady hand guiding teams through difficult projects. Yet now he was nothing more than a casualty of a corporate reshuffle. Instead of speaking, Mark just sat there, his mind swirling with questions he couldn't even begin to ask. He looked around at the faces in the room, Roger, his once supportive manager, and the other executives who had always praised his work, but none of them offered him anything more than blank stares. There was no compassion in their eyes. It was as though this decision had already been made long before he walked into the room. After a few seconds of silence, Mark stood up, his legs shaky beneath him. I don't know what to say," he muttered, feeling a lump in his throat. "This is unbelievable." Roger stood up as well. "I know this is hard, Mark, but I want you to know that this decision wasn't personal. You've been a great asset to the company. We'll make sure you're taken care of, and we'll provide whatever support you need to transition out." Mark didn't respond. He just nodded, not trusting himself to speak. His mind was still reeling, trying to make sense of it all. He grabbed his things from his desk, feeling like a stranger in his own office. The familiar space that had once felt like home now felt cold and alien. He couldn't shake the feeling that his entire world had just been turned upside down. As he walked through the halls of Tech Solutions Inc., his mind kept returning to the same question. How could this happen? How could a company he had invested so much of his time and energy into turn its back on him without warning? The reality of the situation began to sink in as he walked past empty cubicles and meeting rooms filled with the sounds of his coworkers who had no idea that the world had just changed for him. When he reached the exit, Mark paused. He looked back at the building, at the place where he had spent so many years of his life. It felt like an ending he wasn't prepared for, one he hadn't seen coming. The doors closed behind him, and as he walked out into the parking lot, Mark couldn't help but feel like he had just lost a part of himself. All the effort, all the years gone in an instant. But as the shock began to wear off, a strange clarity began to take its place. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something new. A small voice inside him whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was an opportunity, a chance to start fresh. He had spent so many years building a career at Tech Solutions Inc., but now he had the chance to build something of his own. That's when it hit him. He wasn't completely unprepared. He had spent the past few months working on a side hustle, something he had been passionate about for years, but had kept in the background while he focused on his day job. The side hustle, which had started as a small marketing consultancy, had grown steadily, and he realized that it was finally ready to take off. The foundation had been laid, and now he had the time and freedom to make it his full-time focus. Mark took a deep breath as he got into his car. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of possibility, of hope. The job he had lost wasn't the end of his story. It was simply the catalyst for a new beginning. And as he drove away from the place that had been his career for 15 years, Mark realized that he was ready to take the leap. The days following the shock of losing his job felt like a blur to Mark. There was the immediate sense of disbelief, then frustration followed by the crushing realization that his future with Tech Solutions Inc. was over. But in the quiet moments after the shock had settled, a new feeling began to take root, something unfamiliar yet deeply empowering possibility. Mark had never thought of his side hustle as a business before. It had always been a way to fill the gaps in his career, a creative outlet to explore outside of the constraints of corporate life. Over the past few months, he had built a small digital marketing consultancy helping friends and small businesses improve their online presence. but it was never meant to be more than a passion project. But now with his job gone, the idea of turning his side hustle into a full-time business suddenly felt like the most logical next step. The first few days after being let go were spent trying to come to terms with his new reality. He had been handed a severance package, but that didn't make up for the loss of his career, the years of work, the relationships, and the stability he had known. Yet, as he thought more about it, he realized that he had been building something on the side all along. His digital marketing skills, honed through years of working on personal projects and helping local businesses, were now more valuable than ever. It wasn't just a side hustle. It was an opportunity. Mark's first step was to take a closer look at the business he had built so far. His side hustle had grown steadily over the past year, but it had always been part-time sporadic. He had never treated it like a full-fledged business. Now, with no full-time job and all the time in the world, Mark knew it was time to take it seriously. The transition was both thrilling and terrifying. Mark dove into the logistical side of starting a business, something he hadn't fully grasped while juggling a corporate job. He began by researching the necessary legal steps to establish his consultancy as a legitimate business. He spent hours setting up a website, refining his services, and creating a brand identity that aligned with his vision. He wanted his consultancy to stand out something more than just another digital marketing firm. He focused on offering personalized services that spoke to small to medium businesses, especially those in his community who had been overlooked by larger agencies. Mark's vision wasn't just to offer marketing services, it was to build partnerships that helped his clients grow in meaningful ways. As he began to establish the foundation for his business, Mark also worked hard to expand his client base. He reached out to old contacts, past colleagues, and friends who had small businesses and could use his help. His first few clients came through word of mouth, a testament to the reputation he had built over the years. Each new project he took on, he poured himself into focusing not only on delivering results, but on nurturing relationships with his clients. He wanted them to feel supported and valued, knowing that their success would be his success. Mark was no longer just an employee, he was an entrepreneur, and he was driven by a new kind of ambition to create a business that was built on trust, integrity, and long-term growth. One of the first big shifts Mark made was deciding to commit to the business full-time. While he had spent years building his career at Tech Solutions Inc., he quickly realized that his entrepreneurial venture needed his full attention. The more time he devoted to his side hustle, the more it started to flourish. He started setting clear goals, financial goals, growth, targets, and milestones for client acquisition. He set out to create a roadmap for his business's success, and for the first time in his career, Mark had full control over his future. Despite the initial excitement, there were still challenges to navigate. As a new business owner, Mark faced the constant pressure of having to wear many hats: marketing, sales, client management, financial planning. He was no longer just managing projects for someone else. Now he was responsible for every aspect of his business's growth. There were moments of self-doubt, moments when Mark wondered if he had made the right decision. Would his business sustain itself long-term? Would he be able to compete with the larger agencies that had more resources and established reputations? However, these doubts were short-lived. Mark took a deep breath and focused on the positive momentum he was building. With each new client, he gained more confidence in his abilities. The first few successes were small, but they were significant. He had helped a local restaurant overhaul its social media strategy, boosting their foot traffic and sales. He had worked with a small tech startup to launch a targeted ad campaign that resulted in an increase in their customer acquisition. Every successful project reaffirmed that he was on the right track. In those early months, Mark also found himself learning new skills. He took online courses to improve his knowledge of business management, digital advertising, and even basic accounting. These weren't just things he had to do, but areas he found fascinating and empowering. The more he learned, the more confident he became in his ability to run a business. It wasn't about just doing the work, it was about doing it in a way that was sustainable and scalable. Mark learned how to set clear boundaries with clients, how to manage his time efficiently, and how to invest in his business wisely. One of the most surprising aspects of this journey was the sense of freedom Mark found in owning his own business. After years of working for a large corporation, where he was bound by hierarchy and rigid systems, he relished the autonomy of being his own boss. He could decide what projects to take on, what clients to work with, and when to take time off. This newfound flexibility allowed him to better balance his personal and professional life, something he hadn't been able to do in years. He was no longer chasing after someone else's agenda. He was creating his own. But the freedom also came with its own set of challenges. Mark had to remain disciplined. He had to push himself to stay motivated even when the road wasn't clear and when the clients weren't coming in as quickly as he had hoped. The stability he had once found in his corporate job was replaced with the uncertainty of being an entrepreneur. Yet the highs of landing a new client or seeing the positive results of a marketing campaign outweighed the risks. Every small victory, every positive testimonial from a client reinforced the belief that he had made the right decision. The turning point came when Mark signed a contract with a medium-sized company that wanted to revamp its entire digital strategy. The deal was bigger than any project he had taken on before, and it required him to expand his services beyond just marketing. Mark began to hire contractors, designers, content creators, and data analysts to help him meet the demands of the project. This was the moment he realized his side hustle wasn't just a part-time job anymore. It was a business with the potential to grow beyond what he had ever imagined. Mark had officially made the shift from employee to entrepreneur. His side hustle had become a thriving business, and for the first time, he saw a future where he was in control. The uncertainty of his job loss had pushed him to take a leap of faith, and now he was reaping the rewards. He was no longer at the mercy of a corporate structure that no longer valued him. Instead, he was building something that had meaning, that reflected his skills, his passions, and his vision. And as he looked ahead, Mark couldn't help but feel proud of how far he had come. The journey wasn't easy, and there were still challenges to face, but he had turned his side hustle into something real, something that offered him the freedom and fulfillment he had longed for. This was just the beginning. As the months passed, Mark began to see the future unfold in a way he had never imagined. What once seemed like an overwhelming and uncertain leap had turned into a thriving business that was now his full-time focus. The transition from a corporate job to entrepreneurship hadn't been easy, but every challenge had reinforced his belief that he had made the right choice. The weight of losing his job had initially felt like a crushing blow, but now it felt like the catalyst he had needed to take his career into his own hands. Mark's business, Anderson Digital Solutions, had evolved from a side hustle to a growing consultancy that helped businesses develop comprehensive digital marketing strategies. The services he provided were no longer just about social media, management, or simple SEO. Mark had broadened his offerings, bringing in a team of contractors who assisted with everything from web design to content creation and data analytics. What had started as one man working from his dining room table was now a collaborative effort with multiple clients across different industries. The growth of his business wasn't just about numbers. It was about seeing the impact of his work. Mark had always been driven by results, but now it was more than just seeing the success of his clients. It was about building something that was sustainable, that allowed him to be his own boss and work on projects that truly excited him. There was a deep sense of satisfaction that came from working with clients who valued his expertise, who trusted his advice, and who genuinely benefited from his strategies. Every new project felt like a new opportunity, not just to make money, but to make a real difference. Mark's reputation was growing. Clients started referring him to their colleagues, and his online presence began to attract attention. He had taken the time to invest in his personal brand, creating a website that showcased his work and a blog where he shared insights on marketing trends, business growth, and leadership. His social media presence was becoming a valuable resource for businesses looking to build their online presence, and his blog posts began to gain traction, driving traffic to his site and generating new leads. With the rise of his business came the recognition that he couldn't do it alone forever. Mark was at a crossroads. He had always prided himself on doing everything himself, but the increasing demand for his services meant he had to expand his team. After careful thought, he decided to hire a few key employees. He brought on a project manager to help him oversee the growing list of clients, a designer to work on branding, and an assistant to handle administrative tasks. Each hire was a step toward building a business that was not only financially successful, but also scalable. The first time Mark walked into his new office, a small, modern space just outside the city, he felt a sense of pride that was unlike anything he had felt in the corporate world. The office wasn't much, just a few desks, a conference table, and some plants, but it represented something far greater: independence. It represented the work he had done to get here, the sacrifices he had made, and the risks he had taken. This was his new beginning. But even with the excitement of the new office and the growing business, Mark knew that he couldn't afford to rest on his laurels. The world of digital marketing was fast-moving, with trends shifting almost daily. The competition was fierce, and while he had established a strong foundation, there was still much work to be done. Mark spent hours reading industry reports, attending webinars, and staying up to date with new technologies. He knew that to continue growing, he had to stay ahead of the curve and continue providing innovative solutions to his clients. As he expanded his business, Mark also began to think about his long-term goals. He wanted Anderson Digital Solutions to be more than just a profitable venture. He wanted it to be a business that had a positive impact on his community. He began to look into ways to give back, whether through offering free consultations to local startups or donating a portion of his profits to charity. Mark's vision for the future was no longer just about success in terms of revenue. It was about building a brand that represented values he believed in: integrity, community, and creativity. The personal growth Mark had experienced over the past year was just as significant as the professional. He had faced fears he never thought he would have to confront, doubts about his abilities, the uncertainty of his decision to leave corporate life, the fear of failure. But as each day passed, he gained more confidence in himself and his business. The risk he had taken had paid off, and now he felt more in control of his future than ever before. He wasn't simply reacting to what life threw at him, he was creating it. In many ways, Mark had been forced into this new life by the unexpected blow of losing his job. But looking back, he saw it as a blessing in disguise. It had pushed him to pursue something he had always dreamed of, but never had the courage to fully commit to. The experience of building his own business had taught him lessons that no corporate job ever could. He learned how to manage his time effectively, how to delegate tasks, and how to handle the emotional roller coaster that came with being an entrepreneur. As he sat in his new office looking out at the bustling city below, Mark felt a sense of calm wash over him. He was no longer just a cog in the machine of a large corporation. He was a business owner, an entrepreneur, and a leader. He had weathered the storm of losing his job and had come out the other side stronger and more focused. The future was no longer something to fear. It was something to embrace. He had proven to himself that he could build a business, and now he was ready to take it even further. Mark had embarked on a new path, one that he had crafted himself. And for the first time in a long time, he knew that everything he needed to succeed was already inside him.